This program is rated 14 plus and contains scenes of violence and mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
There were obvious traumatic injuries to the victim.
I'd never seen a beating that bad.
That level of hatred was next level. I've never seen anything like that before or since.
All through this ordeal, I've lost many nights of sleep thinking about it.
I think the randomness really struck everyone involved, but here we didn't have any motive.
Yeah. Watch out, now is the time, watch out for Mr. Big.
All your friends that you met, they're not your friends, they're my friends. They're all police officers.
This is evil, hatred, and pure violence at its most disgusting.
It is terrible.
It completely changed the way that I see the world.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, when a kind-hearted, loving family man is found viciously beaten to death, the case becomes a true murder mystery. Investigators used every strategy they had to identify who was responsible for the senseless attack. Here now is Nancy Hicks with Face to Face with Evil.
In the fall of 2010, a woman walking to work in an older residential neighborhood in northwest Calgary cut through the parking lot of a small strip mall. It was still dark outside when she came across a disturbing scene. She called 911 and described what she saw. A man lying in a pool of blood, his body battered and beaten beyond recognition. Constable Greg Alsop was one of the first officers on scene.
It was just before 9 a.m. We got a call. Dispatch came over the radio saying that there's a 1043, which is a check on welfare. There's a male in the parking lot here, covered in blood and laying on the ground unresponsive. The victim's vehicle was parked in the parking lot, nosed into a stall, and when you come around to the passenger side of the vehicle, the victim's body was laying on the ground. The passenger side of the vehicle was completely covered in blood, as if he was trying to get into the vehicle, but obviously couldn't make it and ended up deceased on the ground. We followed the blood trail, which came through the parking lot, up these stairs, and into the back alley here. And then there was a large pool of blood, and the victim's belongings, wallet and car keys and stuff were all laying here on the ground. Definitely didn't seem like a robbery. Nothing was taken. I mean, easily could have taken the vehicle, taken the wallet, anything, but everything was just left. It just seemed very random.
Above the blood-soaked pavement, officers noticed fresh paint on the side of the building.
There's fresh graffiti on the wall, and there was a Nazi swastika freshly painted sometime that evening, I guess. But it was the freshest out of all the graffiti on the wall.
Officers radioed back to their sergeant.
Obviously, it's suspicious, just given the level of violence that happened to that man. So at that point, then it's now securing the scene. Once everything was secure here, we started going door to door in the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and just talking to homeowners and residents just to see if they'd heard anything. People were starting to give us tips of, well, there's this house over here, has some undesirable people living in it.
All possible leads were passed along to the homicide unit, including Detective Dave Sweet, the primary investigator assigned to the case.
I do remember attending the scene that day, later that morning, to have a look around. There was a wallet with identification in it in the alley near to where the body had been found, along with some car keys. And the assumption is that the wallet belonged to the victim that was found a short distance away. And in that wallet, there was identification in the name of Mark Mariani, who is a male that was about 47 years of age at the time.
At that same time, across town, Mark Mariani's family was searching for him. He'd gone out with friends the night before and never came home.
My brothers went out to go look for him because my grandma had called and said he didn't come home the night before. which was very unusual for him.
My mom asked us to go take a look, so me and my brother hopped on our motorcycles and kind of went to around where he was living and where he kind of frequented.
It was when we were riding around a neighborhood in the Northeast when my dad called me, and we were trying to search for him, and I have a Bluetooth headset in my helmet, and I answered it, and all I heard was screaming. It sounded like a war zone was going on in the background. There was screaming, crying, and I could tell my dad was fighting back tears, and he told me that they had found him murdered and that we needed to come home right away. And just hearing my mom screaming, and after my dad said he was murdered, I almost crashed my motorcycle because I just went black. And I don't even remember getting home.
Nothing could have prepared Mark Mariani's family to learn of the horrific fate he suffered.
And it hit us, I don't even know how you can describe it, kind of being in a black tunnel.
Welcome back to Crime Beat. The brutal beating and stomping of Mark Mariani was one of the most horrific assaults that seasoned investigators had ever seen. And with no obvious suspects, police had their work cut out for them. Here again is Nancy Hicks with Face to Face with Evil.
On October 3rd, 2010, at 2:26 a.m., Mark Mariani was captured on CCTV pulling into a Northwest Calgary strip mall. He got out of his SUV and entered a business. About 20 minutes later, he left the store, got into his vehicle to leave, then for some reason changed his mind. He got out and walked a few steps into an alley behind the strip mall.
The alley was very dark at that time. The cameras didn't capture sort of the mouth of the alley or the steps up into the alley. So once he moved away from that camera, we didn't see him again, and we never did truthfully ever see him return.
About 6 hours later, Mark Mariani was found beaten to death.
Mark's injuries were indicative of a very violent attack, a very violent beating that made him nearly unrecognizable to the picture that we had of him from his driver's license. You couldn't put the photo to Mark and say that they were one and the same person.
The medical investigator attended the scene with us and determined that it was indeed a suspicious death. I videotaped the scene prior to it being photographed.
Police examined multiple scenes. The first was where Mark Mariani was found outside of his SUV.
On the vehicle and the ground, there was just a lot of blood down the side of the vehicle, and it appeared that he was trying to get into his vehicle.
They followed a trail of blood through the parking lot, up a few stairs, and around the corner to the side of the strip mall.
In the alley on the north side of the strip mall, there was a lot more blood where the assault had taken place. There was blood projected onto the wall of the strip mall, and there was also, it appeared to be like a boot mark that was left on the wall.
And it certainly appeared to us were consistent with a stomping type action where the toe of the boot or the footwear was running and rubbing up against the wall as the boot was coming down. And it left behind basically particles of rubber.
One of my investigators took a regular swab and swabbed it vigorously to get enough material onto it.
Police also noted and photographed the wall where the beating happened.
It seemed to be swastikas and similar type images.
Forensic investigators were meticulous in gathering evidence.
Across the alley, there was a newly constructed house that wasn't occupied, and on the back step and patio, there was some cigarette butts and some beer bottles, and that was within direct sight of that wall. I directed my guys to seize them and examine them. You never know what's going to be involved or what's going to be relevant, so you collect everything and then send away the irrelevant items.
The last spot they searched was the roof of the strip mall.
You know, it's funny, almost every single scene that we do, if there's a roof, we search it. That is the only scene I can remember ever finding evidence at. So you do it because there might be evidence there, and in this case there happened to be something there.
So we have a witness saying, hey, I heard people in the alley that night. This is kind of the approximate area where they were. We had another witness say, I heard strange noises from the roof that night. And up on the strip mall roof, what we found was a can of red spray paint.
As homicide detectives worked through the early stages of the investigation, officers met with Mark Mariani's family.
People don't understand what it's like to go through a murder in the family, and everything feels foreign and everything feels wrong and upside down, and things happen so quickly that you don't have a chance to really catch your breath, and your brain can't process exactly what's happening to you.
We were ushered into vehicles and straight up to police headquarters. We didn't know any information as to what had happened.
We learned through family that Mark, as a profession, had started to try and help people with some of their legal matters.
So Mark was a real champion for rights, people's rights, and the letter of law. He found a way to help people, and not for money, not for profit, but because that was the right thing.
He was helping me actually get out of a motorcycle ticket. Funny enough, that was the first ticket I had ever gotten, so he was just explaining how we could go to court and plead it down. He was trying to help other people out with tickets as well, so.
We also knew that through that work, Mark had had interactions with others that were doing the same thing, that the family, in a couple of instances, were a little suspicious of. And so the names of those individuals were provided to us, and they became people that would need to be spoken to, and we'll call them people of interest.
At 47, Mark Mariani lived with his parents. His health had deteriorated after suffering from Crohn's disease for more than half of his life.
Growing up, he was, the big, tall, barrel-chested, chubby kid, 240 pounds, 6'2", to the point where when it was ravaging him and it was hurting him, he was down to 140 to 160 pounds. Frail, 95% of the time, it was always in pain, to the point where, he couldn't stand straight, couldn't walk properly, couldn't function. Eating was a chore. Going to the washroom was a panic all the time.
On October 1st, 2010, doctors gave Mark new hope that he wouldn't need his colostomy bag anymore. 2 days later, he was found murdered.
Something we speculated was maybe potentially one of the reasons Mark had gone into the alley that night was to relieve himself, essentially, because it was very uncomfortable for him because of the Crohn's disease.
Police quickly ruled out robbery,
because of the fact that the contents of his pockets seemed to have been spilled out into the alleyway. Nothing appeared to have been taken from the wallet. The wallet looked like it had just been discarded. Credit cards were still there, bank card was still there. There was no indication at all that anything had been taken from the wallet.
But investigators struggled to come up with a motive.
I had a victim that had been randomly attacked, had been stomped and kicked to death. I'd never seen a beating that bad at that time in my career. And I would be hard pressed to say since that point in time either.
On Monday, October 4th, 2010, an autopsy was completed at the Chief Medical Examiner's office in Calgary.
I attended the autopsy with my investigators, and during that we take photographs at the direction of the medical examiner, and there were obvious traumatic injuries to the victim, to his head and to his arms and upper body.
Mark had suffered a variety of injuries that were consistent with being beaten to death. A number of those injuries also were consistent with being caused by either the heel of a boot or the toe of a boot. Mark had significant fractures in his skull and a number of broken bones.
The official cause of death was blunt force trauma.
The victim's clothes were so blood-soaked, so once we took the clothing back to the forensic building, dried it, and then were photographing it more carefully, one of the investigators noticed that one of the stains appeared to be paint instead of blood.
Flecks or spatters that we could see that had been sort of transferred onto Mark's jacket. It suggested that when Mark's attack had occurred, that Mark had come in contact with wet paint, wet red paint, in fact.
Again, investigators went back over tips gathered by the first responding officers who had gone door to door.
This officer, a very diligent officer, he knocked on the tenant that lived above, who advised the officer that there was a group of skinheads that was living in the basement of that home, and that individual believed that they must know something about what had happened.
The house in question was just a few doors down from where Mark Mariani was beaten and killed.
The name Robert Reitmeyer to me didn't mean anything, but this officer, because of previous dealings with Rob, he was aware that he was somebody that was purported to be part of a hate group known as the Western European Brotherhood. Somebody that was known to walk around with big heavy boots.
Officers reviewed CCTV surveillance video from businesses in the strip mall. Robert Reitmeyer was captured on video with two other people in a nearby liquor store at 1:12 a.m., about an hour and 15 minutes before Mark Mariani arrived at the strip mall. They made a purchase and left a couple of minutes later. The rental car business captured them next as they headed northbound towards the alley.
And he's wearing those big boots. And he's with a friend who we later go on to identify as Tyler Stirrup. Rob Reitmeyer and Tyler Stirrup are associates to one another. They purport to be part of the same hate group. Both Rob Reitmeyer and Tyler Stirrup both did have criminal records, and both were known to the police.
In 2006, Robert Reitmeyer was charged with attempted murder. That charge against Reitmeyer was stayed in 2007, which essentially ended the prosecution.
I also know that Reitmeyer had been targeted in a shooting at one time in downtown Calgary, and the bullet missed him and struck a poor gentleman walking down the road, making him blind. One thing that didn't make any sense at all is when we looked at Mark Mariani, and if you're going to contemplate that a white supremacist group is going to be a part of this murder, Mark clearly appears to be a Caucasian male. It sort of flies in the face, I guess, of what we would typically associate if white supremacist groups going to be violent. You know, our assumption usually is that they're going to be violent against non-white people. So it was one thing that made us, question what would their actual motivation be for even carrying out this attack.
Police worked to eliminate other persons of interest and pored over Mark Mariani's banking records and final footprints of life.
He had been at a country bar. Then we knew that he had gone into the store because we had video of him inside the store, and we knew that he had left the store. And that's where his timeline ends. There was several early investigative theories that I was working on. Over the course of the first week, I think we identified potentially 18 people of interest. But what was amazing about this is as we went through this list of people, and each person was cleared or alibied and cleared through an investigative process, the case against Rob Reitmeyer became infinitely stronger, because ones that you can't clear and you can't alibi, the case against them just by virtue becomes stronger.
But if Reitmeyer and Stirrup were involved, police would need further evidence.
We go and we start to try and collect information that will either prove or disprove the possibility that he is involved. And that includes things like utilizing surveillance resources, collecting garbage. In Reitmeyer's garbage, we did not find bloody weapon or clothing, but what we did find were these graffiti doodles. Basically scraps of paper that people had just been doodling on. So now we knew with some level of certainty that at least some of those tags that we had seen on the wall at the crime scene had been made by people that lived in the residence that Reitmeyer lived in. We knew that we had them on video. We searched social media accounts, and we read their comments and some of their posts. We saw that they had an interest in graffiti. There was some vile talk about, particularly on Reitmeyer's account, about curb stomping people when they talk to you. These were things that we saw on the social media. Everything was hedging that they were our suspects. And so I actually made a presentation towards the tail end of 2010 to the Crown Prosecutor's Office.
Detectives were told they needed more evidence.
So we begin an investigation in the shadows.
Months went by and there were no arrests in the murder of Mark Mariani. The homicide unit had Crime Stoppers film a reenactment in hopes of generating further tips in the case. Mark's 3 siblings went to the alley where he was killed. They watched as actors played out the violent attack.
He died for what? It's senseless that, he would have given the shirt off his back to those people. So please do the right thing and come forward to the police with the information that you have so that my family, our mom and dad, and my kids, we can all, understand, and put an answer to why Mark died.
As the investigation continued, police began receiving results of forensic testing on several exhibits seized from the murder scene.
We knew that when Mark's jacket came in contact with red paint, and because we knew that red paint came from that spray paint can, we were able to do testing through the manufacturer on dry times of that paint, and we knew that paint dried within 7 to 9 minutes of it being applied to that wall, which meant that whoever applied that red paint to the wall had done so within 7 to 9 minutes of Mark entering into the alley that night. The red paint found on the wall matched to the red paint found on the jacket, which matched to the red paint found in the spray paint can recovered from the roof.
It was actually kind of frustrating because there was a very poor quality fingerprint that was found on the spray paint can, and it wasn't high enough quality to ever be identified. There was also DNA that was recovered on the spray paint can, and that wasn't sufficient for analysis. The cigarette butts and swabs from the beer bottles that were across the alley were sent away for analysis, and there was DNA on there that linked to the suspects.
At one point, Robert Reitmeyer was questioned by police for possible involvement in property offenses involving graffiti. A warrant was executed at his mother's home where he lived. At that same time, both Reitmeyer and Tyler Stirrup were targets of covert police strategies, including wiretaps.
They've got sweet. What worries me is the fact that when the cops just raided my house for graffiti, you know what I mean? Yeah, so what? So they can't even connect that though. How can they actually factually forensically connect that? They can't. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Other than that, they got nothing. It's just the anxiety I got about it. Oh, obviously. Well, dude, when I first opened the paper and the head the title lead in random killing, I was like, holy I'm like, no way. my stomach kind of dropped a little bit there for a second. Yeah, then I read the article and I was like, joke, console. You know what they're doing? They're just trying to make it to the family. Because I bet you the family's harassing the cops while you guys just trying to make it to the family so it looks like they're doing something, right? They're not doing they got nothing.
Police obtained warrants to surreptitiously seize Reitmeyer and Stirrup's boots for testing, which were then returned. Then, in early 2011, Stirrup met some new friends that were a part of a criminal organization involved in street violence. What he didn't realize was that it was a fictitious organization, and his new friends were actually undercover police officers.
Tyler Stirrup and the undercover police officer developed a trust and a bond. And he decided that on one given day, he was going to tell the undercover police officer what he had done.
You knew this guy or no?
It's total right.
Good duty.
Going too far. Little accent.
Oh.
Little too good at what we do sometimes, I guess.
So he's piss on your guys' work and...
Yeah, he got done in for it. I broke punched him once in the jaw and he hit the floor and it was all booze from there. Just booze. Girls getting at shoot party. Well, when we left, he was barely, he stopped breathing.
Yeah.
Started kicking him again and he started breathing. And we just kept jumping on his head. My bro kept putting his hands on my shoulders and jumping off both feet. We went for a good 5 minutes straight boots to the head, body, everything stomped. 2 of us, both feet in there like a bit of bull on a steak.
The undercover operation ultimately, I think, led to the justification for why this occurred to be simply because they could. A disgusting reason. But it truly was as a result of Mark Mariani entering into the alley that night, 2 men, hateful and full of rage, who had been drinking, fueled an attack against Mark that ultimately took his life for no good reason other than they could. And that's probably the most chilling reason and explanation for what could have occurred. Tyler Stirrup likened it to 2 pit bulls on a stake. And that, I think, sort of speaks to what the motive was. And the motive was, there was no motive. It was just to be able to do it. I think shits and giggles was something else that was used at one time.
You think there's any rats? Stuff like that?
Only me and my bro and you 2 know about it.
Okay.
And my brother's my brother, man.
Well, don't worry, this ain't leaving this room.
2 days later, police monitored a call where Stirrup warned Reitmeyer not to fall victim to an undercover police operation.
Also, another thing, Mr. Big, you got to start being real careful about you.
I know. Yeah.
Watch out. Now is the time. Watch out for Mr. Big.
Yeah, agreed. 100%.
They got absolutely nothing but Mr. Big.
Especially with all these
that's the only option they could ever pin us with.
Especially with all these new guys floating around us now.
On May 31st, 2011, nearly 8 months after Mark Mariani was killed, both Reitmeyer and Stirrup were taken into custody.
They're arrested, they're provided their conversation to a lawyer, and then prior to being formally charged, which they got to go through our arrest processing unit, have a bail hearing to be formally charged, but in between that time, we conduct interviews. The police have an opportunity to conduct an interview.
Reitmeyer refused to speak. Tyler Stirrup, was interviewed by Calgary Police Detective Mike Shute.
For Tyler, like I remember, put my hand out, shake his hand, and he had his arms folded. I mean, he couldn't be more tight than what he was at that moment. But I didn't take my hand away. I'm like, you're shaking my hand. And, I waited, not long, but it was a socially awkward, long pause. But he reached out and he shook my hand. And that's the part where, as an interviewer, we're going to help control that environment a little bit.
The interview went on for hours, and slowly, the detective began presenting their evidence against him.
The investigative side, who we spoke to, the witnesses, we had some CCTV, but it wasn't fantastic CCTV. Some of the key evidence that we had was regarding the spray paint can, the spray paint graffiti, and a transfer of that spray paint over onto Mr. Mariani's clothing. So, those were pieces that I was able to present to him to see if he was going to provide any information, but Tyler didn't provide any information. He, stuck to, I'm not going to talk about this, I'll wait for my lawyer.
The officer played some of the conversations that had been recorded between Stirrup and Reitmeyer.
Yeah, I just had the Calgary Global News on.
And then Detective Shute told Stirrup he was the subject of a Mr. Big sting operation.
I think for him it was a bit of a shock, and he's trying to replay really fast his last couple of months of his life and everything that he did and he said and where he went. And I just said to him, I said, Tyler, like, all your friends that you met, they're not your friends, they're my friends. They're all police officers. So it was a hard shock to him that he had become subject to an elaborate undercover operation and provided that information to us. I think he knew it was a heinous crime, and morally he knew that that was wrong. Did he have remorse? I don't believe that for a second.
After the interview, both Stirrup and Reitmeyer were taken to arrest processing, where they would be formally charged. Their conversations en route were recorded.
Fingerprint. Mr. Big. Should have known better than trust anybody. Here I am telling you to be careful, Mr. Big. You think it's Mr. Big? Yeah.
Both Tyler Stirrup and Robert Reitmeyer were accused of the second-degree murder of Mark Mariani.
Nancy, what are you learning about their history?
Robert Reitmeyer and Tyler Stirrup are best known for their affiliation with white power groups in Calgary. The two are believed to be leaders of the Web, or Western European bloodline. Reitmeyer was charged with attempted murder in 2006 after a man's skull was cracked open. Those charges have since been stayed.
Nancy, what are police saying about the motive in this case?
Police say they believe this was a completely random attack. They say Mariani was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it could have been anyone. It just happened to be that Mariani was the victim.
Welcome back to Crime Beat. An undercover police operation revealed a senseless motive for the violent murder of Mark Mariani. But would the evidence be enough to convict the pair of self-proclaimed neo-Nazis? Here now is Nancy Hixt with a conclusion of Face to Face with Evil.
Days after Robert Reitmeyer and Tyler Stirrup were arrested and charged, Mark Mariani's family invited journalists into their home. They stood together facing a wall of cameras to talk about Mark and how their lives had changed since he was so brutally killed.
All through this ordeal, I've lost many nights of sleep thinking about it.
I don't consider them men to beat up one person who's underweight and can't even defend himself.
If I know my son, he would have called for Mom, Dad, Kathy, and his brothers to have some help.
This was nothing more than pure evil at work. And what really saddens us is that he died alone in a parking lot And we couldn't be with him.
When Mark passed away, he took him away. He wouldn't let me go and hold and just comfort and hold. He wouldn't let us do that.
They took some solace in knowing the accused killers would face the justice system.
I think there are two striking things about the case. One was that Mark Mariani was totally unknown to these people. They had absolutely no reason to become angry with him or to have a grudge against him. And the other thing was just the savagery of the beating. The best pieces of evidence we had were the trace evidence and the intercepted communications.
Reitmeyer and Stirrup were supposed to stand trial together in March of 2013, 2.5 years after Mark was killed. But given Stirrup's admissions in the undercover operations, he made a last-minute plea.
Guilty plea today in the death of a 47-year-old Calgary man more than 2 years ago.
That plea took Mariani's family by complete surprise. They were prepared for a lengthy second-degree murder trial. But today, Tyler Stirrup admitting to the unprovoked beating death of Mark Mariani.
It was a shock that this turned around like it did today.
It was a random attack, Stirrup and another man repeatedly kicking and stomping Mariani. He died of severe head injuries. Today, Stirrup, the former white supremacist, addressing the court and offering an apology to the family.
The only thing that he offered, and as I indicated to the court, is that this was senseless. It was unfortunate. If he could turn back the clock, he would.
I want to believe it. I want to accept it. I want to have faith in humanity, but I've lost some of that faith.
The Mariani family providing victim impact statements to the court today, describing Mark as a kind and tender heart, saying they would not even wish this kind of a loss on Tyler Stirrup himself. Stirrup was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. The trial for the second man accused of this murder, Robert Reitmeyer, is scheduled to begin in the fall.
Stirrup later appealed his sentence, but it was dismissed. Then, in November of 2013, just over 3 years after Mark's death, Robert Reitmeyer stood trial in front of a jury.
It's believed that this was a completely unprovoked attack. The Crown outlining its case today to the 12-person jury made up of 9 women and 3 men. It will be up to that jury to decide if Robert Reitmeyer is guilty of second-degree murder.
The worst day of our life was 3 years ago. And today's the second worst day because we have to start this all over again. We just still don't know why. We want answers why Mark had to die that day.
The Mariani family told us they plan to come to court for every day of the trial. They want to ensure that justice is served. The trial is expected to last 3 weeks.
The evidence against Mr. Reitmeyer really boiled down to 4 things. One was we could prove that he lived in the vicinity of where the murder took place. We could prove because of a statement that he made that he had painted the graffiti that was at the location where Mr. Mariani died. And because there was a red stain on Mr. Mariani's jacket, we could prove that he had been in the area right around the time the graffiti had been painted, because it appeared that this had smudged off the wall. And then there was a black smudge on the wall, which suggested someone had used a kicking motion, and the material from that smudge matched material that was obtained from boots seized from Mr. Reitmeyer. And then finally, and most importantly, we had private communications between he and Mr. Stirrup that were intercepted. And those did not involve direct confessions, but they certainly indicated the comments of someone who was well aware of the details of the crime and was afraid they were going to be charged for that crime.
Yeah, the whole neighborhood will be in jail for the rest of my life. I just look at the window because I'm waiting for every minute of the day. My daughter's going to come fucking kick down.
The prosecution was not allowed to talk about Reitmeyer's association with white power groups or refer to his countless tattoos.
He was so heavily tattooed, there was no way that Mr. Reitmeyer could have hidden all of his tattoos, but he did try to hide some of them with high collars and things of that sort. But he had the SS tattoo on his cheek, and there was really nothing he could do about that. Now, we didn't comment on that at all, but we knew the jury would be looking at those things.
Today, the Crown pointed to multiple conversations between Robert Reitmeyer and Tyler Stirrup. The intercepted conversations were played during the trial, including this conversation that was recorded 8 months after Mariani's death.
Yeah. Oh, I'm famous for your names are at worst.
Yeah, they're telling me second degree, but
Yeah, but they would start out by.
yeah, it's not really it isn't part of the ground.
They would start with the worst possible thing. It always gets knocked down a bunch.
Yeah. Once the government gets knocked down for a second, it goes to the next part, right?
Today, the jury heard from the defense. In closing arguments, Reitmeyer's lawyer claimed there is no compelling evidence that could convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Reitmeyer was at the scene or involved in the attack on Mariani.
The jury decided that the Crown had proven that Mr. Reitmeyer was an active participant in the murder of Mr. Mariani. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. His parole ineligibility was set at 13 years.
Reitmeyer appealed both his conviction and sentence. Both were dismissed. The Court of Appeal described the crime as a murderous assault of a defenseless person by two strangers simply for the fun of it.
Yeah, I think the randomness really struck everyone involved. Usually it may not be a sensible motive. It may be fueled by alcohol or something like that. But here, we didn't have any motive.
Not long after the court process finished, Mark's mother passed away.
I think that's what killed her. I think that's why she died. She couldn't understand, and she couldn't let go, and the pain was too much. And I see it in my siblings, and my nephews, and my niece, my brother-in-law. I see it. I see the pain, and I see how it's affecting them, and I see how, whether they admit it or not, I can see the pain. And it ages you, and it turns a bright spirit into less.
Now, almost 15 years after Mark Mariani was murdered, both of his killers are eligible for parole.
I think Stirrup is just violent by nature, but I get the feeling that he's kind of a follower and doesn't really understand what he's doing or how he's doing it, even though he does. The thing with Reitmeyer is that he's the mastermind. He's the conniving one. He's the smarter of the two, I think. This is evil, hatred, and pure just violence at its most disgusting.
He murdered my uncle in cold blood in the most brutal way possible. So why does he get to have a second chance? And he's gonna have a second chance to potentially harm someone else.
It's disgusting. Deep down to the core of who they are is terrible. Their belief system is just full of hate. My fear is if they get out, that they'll try and track us down and find us, or they might just pass some poor innocent person on the side of the road and victimize them.
Tyler Stirrup was eligible to apply for day parole in 2018, but so far hasn't sought release. In January of 2025, the Parole Board of Canada granted Robert Reitmeyer a 60-day unescorted temporary absence and stated, quote, he would not present an undue risk to attend a program 4 days a week. Reitmeyer said in his free time, he plans to work out and experience Victoria. The Mariani family does not support the leave. They still struggle with the devastating loss, but try to focus on keeping Mark's memory alive. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.
This program is rated 14+ and contains scenes of violence and mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
The 5 Point Generals are viewed as one of the biggest threats in the GTA at that time.
There was a number of shootings that were attributed to the 5 Point Generals and their members within a very short period of time.
With that escalation of that kind of gun violence, we were looking for where these guns are coming from, who is bringing these guns in. It took a wiretap of this magnitude and significance to take these individuals out.
So we're listening, we're watching.
On May 23rd, there was calls coming that there was something coming across the border.
Wait a minute. Well, stop. How much did they get? 60, right?
Like the stage was set for them to acquire a large shipment of guns, and we were set to intercept it. He reverses into the driveway. Someone unknown to us opens the trunk, takes a large package out, a heavy package, puts it in the back. We do a high-risk vehicle stop of a vehicle and bringing his vehicle to a halt.
At the time, was the biggest firearm seizure in the history of the Toronto Police.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. In Canada's largest city, one of the biggest threats to public safety is the escalating gang violence that has turned the streets into battlegrounds. Deadly force is now the preferred method to settle scores, and innocent bystanders are often paying the price. Now, to stop the flow of illegal guns from across the U.S. border, police are fighting back, working to infiltrate the street gangs before more lives are lost. Here now is Karen Lieberman with The Hand Behind the Gun.
Weston Road and Lawrence Avenue in Toronto's West End. The sounds of a busy, vibrant community at work and at play. But lately, these streets have been shattered by different sounds.
One male was armed with a sawed-off shotgun, while the other male was in possession of a handgun. They were only in the store for 5 seconds. It was a frenzied attack. They just opened fire in the direction of the table with total disregard for the safety of anybody in the store.
We quickly ran down the street. I was able to see that they were at least pumping his chest to try to revive him. When we got to the hospital, they said that he was already gone.
I miss my baby. My baby was a good boy.
Gerald Hagley was just 17 years old. Shot while out for late-night pizza with friends.
A survivor of gun violence, they transformed our beloved teenager on the brink of his manhood from a living, breathing person to a statistic.
It's been an epidemic surging in Toronto since 2005, the year of the gun.
There's definitely there's a murder here.
Year-old Eamon Beckles was gunned down by the front doors of this North Etobicoke church while attending his best friend Jamal Hemming's funeral. The 17-year-old had also been shot to death a week earlier.
A shocked congregation watches paramedics lift Eamon Beckles into an ambulance alongside his best friend's hearse.
The question I need to ask, how many more victims are we going to have until it's going to stop? If we stand up and we say no more, the gangsters are going to have to hear it. They can't hide behind the guns. They can't hide behind the silence, because we as a people are not going to let them hide any longer.
Fast forward to 2018. Gun and gang-related homicides in Toronto have almost doubled in the last 5 years.
Right here in this area, I would say this is the core of the 5PG territory, their drug turf. And there's been numerous shootings and numerous homicides right here on these streets, and many of them are directly related to the 5PG.
The 5 Point Generals. Police intelligence have been investigating them for months.
The 5PG were responsible for at least 4 murders, 10 attempted murders, I think it was 69 robberies.
And detectives fear the violence is escalating.
There was a number of shootings that were attributed to the 5 Point Generals and their members within a very short period of time. There were some retaliations going back and forth between different gangs in the city. They were getting out of control.
Along with the escalation of violence in the street is the constant intimidation through social media and the bragging and postings of gang symbols and their tattoos and flashing their money and their weapons, and the fueling of the conflict through music videos.
Fresh out of jail, back in the game like Vic.
They did have a hierarchy. I would say Joe Dawkins was at the top of that list. This group shared in their resources, their profits, and also their weapons. We identified that there was 145 guns seized from this particular group of their associates.
With that escalation of that kind of gun violence, we were looking for where these guns are coming from. Who is bringing these guns in? There's potential for being live calls of where the shootings are about to occur. That's my.
The Guns and Gangs Major Project section launches Project Patton.
In February of 2018, we were granted a authorization to intercept private communications of 91 named persons.
Once we start going live right off the start, who are we going to target?
When we do our initial wiretap authorization, we look to identify the back ends, who's supplying drugs, who's supplying the firearms to our organization.
In a covert location, they're about to infiltrate this dangerous gang's world.
Once we flip the switch, once we go live, there is no easing into it. Anything could happen on day one.
I was one of the lead investigators in the wire room. Our job is to direct surveillance, listen to intercepts as they come in.
Yo, yeah.
We end up listening to about 30 lines at a time, but some people can have multiple phones.
Is that what? It's a mixture of things.
We're getting thousands of calls a day.
Investigators are hearing the information. The surveillance team receives the information, and we become the eyes of the project, and we're being directed towards the violence, towards the people who are committing the violence.
Andrew, he was driving down the street, and all of a sudden he calls into the wire room. He says, "I'm hearing shots being fired. I'm not sure where they're coming from."
I pull up to this light, and as I'm sitting here at 5:30 in the evening, gunshots go off. Pedestrians on this side of the street, pedestrians on that side of the street, they're running northbound, they're running eastbound. Honestly, pandemonium out here. I call the wire room, and almost immediately it's one of our targets on the line who's been shooting into traffic. We're able to arrest him and seize the firearm he actually used in that shooting.
They take down violent crime, but want to uncover who is putting guns into hands.
We start intercepting communications of certain individuals. One of them was Bill Allison. Bill Allison was an affiliate of many of these 5 Point Generals.
So what time are you?
He's speaking to a male in Florida. He was referring to as Biggs.
One Japanese on right now.
This group spoke patois.
Something completely different. You understand?
It was a very hard patois, very difficult to even understand.
Pick up the Irish much there.
There was coded language used. There's different terms for guns, for drugs, for money.
They listen into a call from a car. A meeting is going down between Allison and an unknown male.
Come, make a right, Paul Lawrence. I'm meeting the shoppers. All right, cool.
Something that had a criminal element to it. And at that point, so I contacted Detective Steinwell, said, we need to see this meet. We need to identify who Mr. Allison is meeting with, and advised him that we believe this transaction is going to be down at the shops at Don Mills.
So our surveillance team sets up in that area, and we're waiting for somebody, and we're not sure who it is. So we race to this area, and we actually find them in the parking lot. They acknowledge each other, and then they follow each other in tandem through the lights and down the Donway, and both vehicles then turn down this driveway.
Next to these high-rise condos.
Next to these high-rise condos, and one vehicle in front of the other. Both get out, have brief conversation, and the male goes to the trunk of his minivan and takes out a package. He gives it to Bill Allison, he puts it in his vehicle, and I observe all of that.
Detectives follow a man not known to them before.
He pulls into his driveway, and from his truck he pulls out several boxes of mangoes and puts them in his garage.
At that point is how we identified Harris Poyser in this criminal organization.
They later hear what was in that package.
The one them give you, him have way prettiest than that man. Come one there. Okay, all right.
What we believe and know now is that there was a firearm transaction in between the shops at Don Mills.
As the investigation into this group gathers steam, we realize that these firearms are coming from the United States, and they're going to go directly to the streets of Toronto into the hands of criminals.
There's been an uptick in gun violence in Toronto's West End, and police are zeroing in on a supply pipeline for a violent gang. Steps away from a busy shopping plaza, they observe a meeting that pays off.
Harris Poyser met with Bill Allison that day, and there's clearly an exchange on that day. It's like, wow, we have a gun trafficking right off the start like this. How big is this?
They hear that the firearm was arranged by someone across the border.
And give us the victory again and again.
Who appears to be singing a day after the delivery.
We intercepted Biggs. They had a Florida phone number under a false name. This was a subject that was completely unknown to us.
Hello? Yeah.
You could tell that he was very skilled at what he was doing as far as criminal activity, and this was not his first rodeo.
Who get them paper? Momsy.
In a three-way call, they hear Biggs arrange another meeting with someone by the name of Mumsy.
The intercept came in, and it was clear that Bill Allison was going to meet Mumsy, and there was going to be an exchange of money, but also an exchange of information.
So that Queen and 50? Yeah.
Yeah, Queen and 50 me there. I found the big. Where you there?
Not that far from there. That's why I asked you. All right, give me 5 minutes. All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The observations were made in a grocery store parking lot. That's where they ended up meeting up. She was parked. Bill Allison pulls into the parking lot, parks close to her. He goes over and meets with her, provides her with a bundle, and then she left the location.
We didn't think Mumsy's role was that big other than being the recipient of potentially money or whatever Allison had given her. We believe it was money because looking back at it, it was a gun on that day that Harris Poyser gave to Bill Allison.
Harris Poyser, on the other hand, becomes a big target in this investigation.
When I first identified Harris Poyser, he wasn't our typical gun trafficker. He was an older man, he had a family, he had a normal job, I recall it was importing fruit from Jamaica. Once we started listening to Harris Poyser, it opened up the big picture.
Good morning, sir.
Pleasant good morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'm good.
So we have about 30 depending way right now.
So in May of 2018, information was given to us from the wire room that Harris Poyser was meeting two of his associates in this parking lot. And they met roughly in this area here. Harris Poyser parked his vehicle in this spot.
One male comes up, very young looking, sunglasses, approaches Harris Poyser, and we think, who is this? We have a second male approach. They all seem to be deep in conversation.
Kareem Lewis was identified through facial recognition. So we had such a good face shot of him from the surveillance video. We were able to get that matched to an arrest photo that we already had on file with the service. And then Kamar Cunningham was identified through the vehicle that he arrived in.
We weren't sure what their roles were in this group. We really weren't sure what Harris Poyser's role was in this group, but we were going to find out very shortly.
That day, later, Harris Poyser went on his way, and Kamar Cunningham and Kareem Lewis drove to Cornwall.
A border town in eastern Ontario, around 100 kilometers from the capital, Ottawa.
They went to a house on 515 Oliver Lane in Cornwall. And not much on the lines about any pickups, any guns, any drugs coming back, or was it money going to the person at Cornwall?
They pulled on a street where we couldn't get any observations, and then they drove back directly on the highway.
At this point, we didn't know what was exchanged, if anything at all. We followed the targets back to the city.
What we didn't realize at that time, there was an exchange of guns that was coming back.
The very next day, Kamar Cunningham met Harris Poyser again in this lot, and went closer towards this World's Gym.
They were sitting in their vehicles. There was a door-to-door meeting, but unfortunately our surveillance team wasn't set up in a position to observe that.
And although information was coming from the wire room that there was possibly a firearm transaction, we were unable to see anything change hands.
We were never able to make the call to do a takedown at that moment.
From that meet, we don't follow Poyser, we follow Kamar.
Kamar Cunningham was then followed back to Mississauga, where he was seen carrying a bag from his vehicle and meeting people in and around his condo.
A call tells them what they missed.
They discussed how the guns weren't good guns.
Which one did I load?
The old one, you want one rusty one, come my brother, you know?
That means I load?
Some of them were rusted, some were broken.
Everybody load, brother.
No, man, one old rusty one, man. You know, but you know, that was a mistake, man.
But it can load.
It wasn't until later that intercepts told us that 30 firearms exchanged hands that day.
What was scary is that Kamar Cunningham was able to get rid of those guns so quick. And they weren't good guns. They were rusted. They were just selling them off and people were taking them.
He's the one who delivers it to the streets.
Just weeks into the wiretap, they've discovered a cell that's bringing guns to Toronto, and they've just missed a big shipment.
We were frustrated, we were a bit upset, but it wasn't long after that we started to receive information that there would be a larger load coming in from Cornwall.
We determined at that point in time there was not going to be another shipment making it through. So we were going to do everything we could possibly do to ensure the second shipment was not making it into Toronto.
What they don't realize is that the next shipment will be the biggest in Toronto police history. That is, if they catch it.
Welcome back. Just weeks into a massive wiretap investigation, Toronto police are dropped into an international smuggling ring. They are rushing to connect the dots before the pipeline brings more guns over the border. We now return to Karen Lieberman with the hand behind the gun.
Toronto's Guns and Gangs team is on high alert for another shipment of guns.
At that point, we didn't know what was going on in Florida, how these guns were getting up here. We knew nothing other than the fact they showed up on the other side of the border in Cornwall.
Detectives ask alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents to track down a target with a Florida phone number.
We hear that we have an individual who goes by Biggs. Did not know his true identity, and we were able to determine that he had multiple driver's licenses and a couple of different passports in alternative identities.
They've tracked him all across the state of Florida with no luck.
On May 23rd, there was calls coming that there was something coming across the border, that Biggs had set it up down there.
Wait a minute. Well, stop. How much did they get? 60, right?
In Toronto, they also witness a flurry of activity.
So we're listening, we're watching, we're taking every little detail into consideration so we don't miss this shipment. While Harris Poyser jostles around his mangoes, he's also looks to be animated when he's talking to Kamar.
And right away we determined that Poyser was going to go to Cornwall and Kareem Lewis was going to go to Cornwall with him. And we had 2 surveillance teams on.
They've trailed cars up this route before, but never like this. A transport crash has caused the highway to ignite on fire.
On that day, all traffic, the 401 was closed, all traffic was diverted off of the highway, and so it was very challenging to get him to Cornwall.
While stuck in traffic,
Then it moved from 18.
they rely on the wire room, who are listening into their targets in hopes of finding out what they're picking up.
I don't know. Yeah, I think we got 60. Yeah.
And they talked 60 and 100, you're still thinking kilos of coke. So on that date, was it the guns coming across or was it drugs coming across?
We follow Harris Poyser to Cornwall. We set up observations there and we're waiting. We're waiting to see what Travis is hearing in the wire room.
Trust me. We're supposed to done already, because they're pretty. Yeah, everyone.
And at one point, Harris Poyser says very quickly at the end of the conversation, he says to Biggs, how are they wrapped? Are they wrapped nicely?
You put them in a plastic bag each? No, man, they must scratch up them wrap the right way. Them wrap up. Very good.
His response to that was, no, they're all packaged very softly so they don't scratch. At that point, I realized it was guns and not drugs. No one cares about scratching kilos of cocaine. I've never heard that term. But scratching new guns, that would devalue them. So at that point, I was confident there was 60 guns.
The stage was set for them to acquire a large shipment of guns, and we were set to intercept it. When they get to Cornwall, Kareem Lewis goes to a rest stop of the highway, and he waits for Poyser.
Harris Poyser was observed to go to 515 Oliver Lane.
He reverses into the driveway. Someone unknown to us opens the trunk. It goes to the garage. takes a large package out, heavy package, puts it in the back, goes back to the garage. I relay that information to Travis Clark, and he corroborates the information that he's receiving on the wiretap.
He said there were very heavy bags, just 2 of them, that went into Mr. Poyser's vehicle.
Poyser never gets out of the car. The trunk is closed, and then he turns back the exact same way he came.
After Poyser picked up the guns, Poyser was calling Lewis to meet up and do the exchange, but Lewis didn't answer the phone because he was asleep. And because we had our surveillance team watching him, so we knew he was asleep, and that's why he wasn't answering the phone.
The surveillance team in the plane followed Poyser out of the area.
When he gets onto the road that leads to the highway, my thoughts were, we cannot let him get onto the highway. And from there, Travis Clark is confident enough to tell us to stop the vehicle, arrest Poyser for possession of firearm, and seize what is in the trunk.
He had a full grasp of the moment, as well as I did, and the chance we're about to take. And when I see that word takedown, I'm putting one of my best friends, Andrew Steinwall, in a precarious position, but I'm asking him to do his job. They have to take this individual in custody. They have a natural fight or flight mentality like most humans do, and most of them are armed. It's a very dangerous situation to be in. Then I hung up the phone and I sat and waited. And at that point, it was just quiet. It was quiet.
Adrenaline is pumping at this time. We're hoping that, we were right. We're hoping that what we were seeing are firearms in there, and we're hoping that the information that Travis Clark received was accurate. We do a high-risk vehicle stop of a vehicle by surrounding his vehicle with other vehicles and bringing his vehicle to a halt. Harris Poyser is taken out without any incident, and I go directly to the trunk.
The room was intense, and you could hear a pin drop waiting for that call from the team and Detective Steinwall to let us know exactly what they found.
And the call came in, and I could hear it in his voice. I've known Andrew, we've worked together our entire careers. I could hear it in his voice.
We popped the trunk, and there is 2 duvet cases, plastic, see-through, and you could tell that these would be ideal for putting firearms in and not scratching them. And he said, "How many are in there?" I said, "A lot, like a lot." At first, I think I told him, I feel 10, I feel like 15. I think there's 30 in this one. I think Travis said to me, "Are you lying? Are you lying?" I'm not lying. There's not 5, there's 10, there's 20, there's 30 in each bag.
And at that moment, it's just like the stress of getting this, and actually massive part of our goal was to stop the flow of guns into this community.
I stayed with the firearms, and while I was waiting for Cornwall Police, I proved the firearm safe on the hood of the vehicle. It actually looked very pretty on the top of the hood, top of the police car. I was thinking about what Travis had told me, that they said these are pretty guns, and they look pretty. Like, there was pink guns and camouflage and light blue.
Those pictures were sent back to the wire room, and it was a pure celebration.
There were a lot of high fives that day.
It was the single largest seizure of guns in Toronto police history.
I can advise that 60 of the handguns that you see before you today were obtained in a single seizure from an individual who was intending on delivering them to high-ranking individuals within the 5-Point General's hierarchy. The guns were destined to become crime guns in Toronto and the GTA.
They described them in the intercepts as pretty little things. They were pink camouflage. They were small. They had extended magazines that could hold, illegally, hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition in that gun. So when you get them all laid out with the colors, colors of the rainbow, they were pretty little guns.
They're so perfect for carrying on your person. They're almost meant to match your outfit, to show your friends. Like, these are guns that can be easily concealed and all in the hands of criminals. They are so dangerous.
I don't know how many homicides we stopped. I don't know how many shootings we stopped, how many innocent victims were saved from 60 guns being out there.
But the big question on their minds, is there more to come?
From the time the guns were seized, law enforcement scrambling, trying to figure out where did these guns come from? Most importantly, are there more that we missed that are going to reach the destination?
They uncover that this was one of 2 shipments.
They had 40 guns apparently that were coming again. There was indications they were in New York. No idea where they were in New York.
We suspect what happened is once we seized the 60 guns in Cornwall, they shut down operations and those 40 guns never made it back into Canada, and we never had any further intercepts to indicate that those guns made it into Canada.
There is little chatter on the lines.
We were only intercepting Biggs through his conversations with Bill Allison and with Harris Poyser at that point. So once we arrest those individuals, it's quiet. It's quiet.
At this time, we still didn't know who Biggs was. Obviously, he's the central figure who's arranging all of this.
So after the guns are seized, we begin the task of identifying the firearms through their serial numbers and determining where they were purchased and who purchased them.
I was a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, commonly known as ATF. The ATF became part of the investigation immediately to help facilitate and coordinate the traces. ATF has to call the manufacturer, who then calls the importer or wholesaler, who then calls the individual dealer, and the individual dealer maintains a paper record of that purchase.
They trace the guns back to Central Florida.
The Central Florida Gun Show is at the Central Florida Fairgrounds, and it's held quarterly. Vendors, which are normally federal firearms licensees, they set up a table and they're able to sell to the public. Over 60 of them were bought in that location.
And they discover they were bought by just 3 people.
We go to the gun dealer and we say, okay, can you just give us everything you have from the purchase? If you have surveillance video, we wanted to know, were there other people present during the purchase? In this case, the purchasers acted alone. They bought 10, 15 guns. The exchange occurred just like any other, and they walked away. So what we found was that the purchasers were not what you would call like career criminals. However, they were exploited and used by career criminals to put their name on firearms. We had 3 different people, seemingly unrelated. The fact that they didn't know each other and they told a consistent story and they appeared coached on how to potentially evade prosecution and evade capture, it showed us the level of sophistication within this organization.
So combined, those 3 individuals ended up purchasing 58 of the 60 handguns within 4 days of them arriving in Canada.
It's a very short time to crime. The time it takes for an illegal gun to end up in the hands of a criminal.
We're used to seeing hundreds of days, sometimes years, on the time to crime stats when we seize a gun, but in this case, we knew it was a direct line from Florida up to Canada through Cornwall.
They don't believe they came through a border checkpoint.
Through our investigation, we determined that they came north into the border on the U.S. side, at which point they utilized a male known to us only as Apache to bring them through the Akwesasne Reserve just in the Cornwall area.
We had an idea who he was. There was never enough evidence to identify who he was.
They are still trying to put a face to the man they think is calling the shots.
Biggs was the one telling how many were going. He was coordinating with Allison. He was coordinating with Apache. He was coordinating with Harris Poyser.
For somebody to disguise who they are, where they live, continually move around multiple states in the US, multiple countries, through multiple identities. As far as level of criminal, he would be somebody who's at the top.
After a 9-month investigation, they make the call to take down the 5 Point Generals.
We were about to kick in the doors of 49 residences, and we needed the assistance of 21 tactical teams to do so. And our goal was to arrest the 60 suspected gang members and their associates.
The magnitude of the takedown, given there's so many to arrest, the violence of these individuals, the guns that we expected still to be in their residences.
As they execute warrants, the gun tally grows.
In the basement of one of the residences, we found a firearm manufacturing and modification operation.
So they were building basically Frankenstein guns and then distributing them out onto the street. And we seized, I think, 5 of them during our investigation for Project Patton, and then shut down this individual that was building them.
There was 78 firearms seized at the end of the project. I believe there was 93 people arrested and charged.
They arrest all but one of the suspects they've identified in this gun smuggling ring.
When we do our takedown, Kamar Cunningham had actually fled the country. He was out of the country in Jamaica, so we put out a warrant for his arrest.
All right, just have a seat on that wall there.
They bring in one of their very first targets, Bill Allison, for questioning.
Okay, who's Biggs?
Biggs is a guy in the States.
They're closing in on the man who they believe is the architect of a firearms pipeline.
Welcome back. In a major crackdown, police arrested nearly 100 alleged associates of a violent street gang, bringing a wave of hope to the city's fight against crime. Well, authorities are now focused on tracking down the mastermind behind the illegal flow of firearms crossing the border. Here now is Karen Lieberman with a conclusion of the hand behind the gun.
He'll be one of the first lines up. He's probably going to have multiple.
Detectives hope to finally put a face on the man they say is at the top of an international firearms smuggling ring.
There's a lot of people that were arrested this morning. We're alleging that you're part of a criminal organization, a larger group.
They've arrested Bill Allison, the target they followed to the shops at Don Mills and witnessed receive a package from Harris Poyser, which they later heard was a firearm.
Have you come into possession of firearms in the last 3 months? By anybody on the street or anything like that? No. So you don't sell firearms or anything like that?
I don't sell firearms.
What if I told you we've been listening to you for 3 months on your phone?
You've been listening to my phone for 3 months?
Yeah.
Maybe possible.
Yeah?
Yo, yeah.
They play back the phone intercepts.
Hello? Hello? Yo, where you at, Jeff?
They want to know who the other voice is, the man he was speaking with.
What's his actual name?
I don't know his actual name. I know his mom.
And it just became more clear that he was the son of Barbara Booth.
Surveillance teams identified Barbara Booth, who they knew as Mumsy, after she allegedly met with Bill Allison in this grocery store parking lot.
Mumsy got arrested too?
That's his mom, but I don't know.
Yeah, she's here.
She's here.
Because you gave her money and to send for him. What do you think Mumsy's gonna tell us? What the money's for?
I don't know.
Don't know. Hello.
Hey.
Nice to see you. It's Barbara.
Yeah.
And last name Booth.
Yes.
Does the name Biggs mean anything to you?
Huh?
Does the nickname Biggs mean anything to you?
Biggs? No.
Never heard that name before?
She has 2 older sons. One piques their interest.
Okay, what's his name?
Ernest Wilson.
Ernest Wilson, okay. When's the last time you spoke to him?
I don't remember.
What What was your purpose of meeting Allison that day?
I don't remember. No.
Okay.
Barbara Booth denies meeting and receiving money from Bill Allison.
If you were to receive a sum of money, $4,600 at the food base, that's something you would remember?
How much?
$4,600.
No, sir. Money. No, sir.
On June 21st, when we had Barbara Booth, Mumsy, in a room and the other members of this network, ultimately we were able to discover that Ernest Wilson was Barbara Booth's son and also believed to be Biggs at that time.
Police quickly discover Ernest Wilson is wanted.
Ernest Wilson was a fugitive. He was arrested for possession for the purpose of trafficking cocaine. I believe he fled. He didn't appear in court after he was released, and he fled at that time.
Ernest Wilson was a Canadian citizen that was hiding out in the States and trying to evade arrest in our country.
When Toronto police find out, they let us know the marshals down in South Florida were tracking Ernest Wilson.
As the manhunt intensifies across the border, Kamar Cunningham is captured in Toronto.
He flew back into Pearson Airport, and when he arrived at Pearson, he ended up getting identified and arrested.
The Crown prepares to prosecute this cell, but all will not be brought to trial. Shortly after arrest, Kareem Lewis took his own life. Detectives get a call about Ernest Wilson.
The marshals had a location for Wilson in Coconut Creek, Florida, and they were looking to apprehend him. They tracked him down to a certain apartment complex, but they were too late. He had been murdered, killed via a gunshot wound, about 4 hours before the marshals located him. We feel that he was killed due to an ongoing dispute that he had with others based on the life he was living.
I am talking just in general. I am not no parents.
Barbara Booth, she was charged with a very minor offense in the overall scope of the criminal organization. So at that time, the decision was made to drop the charge on her, and then she was able to travel to the U.S. to collect her son's body.
In 2020, the trial is set to go remotely. Just months before, Harris Poyser pleads guilty to firearms importation and trafficking, leaving Bill Allison and Kamar Cunningham to stand.
There's a lot of elements to that, to meet and prove to a judge that they were knowingly and actively a part of this criminal organization.
Yeah. Supposed to done already, because them pretty. Yeah. Everyone.
Based on these complex investigations, it is a real challenge for the Crown attorneys. Hours and hours of surveillance video, hundreds of thousands of wiretap intercepts.
Yeah, we're supposed to get 62.5, but him have $500 for me.
There's no better evidence than listening to the accused with his own voice talk about their own criminal activities.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, the wiretap produced the best evidence possible to result in numerous convictions.
Harris Poyser is sentenced to 15 years for firearms importation and trafficking.
Bill Allison was charged in relation to the firearms trafficking. He received a sentence of 6 years and 8 months.
Kamar Cunningham was convicted of firearms trafficking, but he was not there to hear his sentence.
Even though he had been convicted and was facing a fairly serious sentence, they released him on bail again, and then very short time before his actual sentencing date, he was reported missing by his sureties, the people that were supposed to be responsible for monitoring his activities, and he has not been seen since. So I applied to have him added to the BOLO program. They agreed, and there's currently a $50,000 reward for his arrest.
Kamar Cunningham may or may not be pulling the trigger, but he is definitely putting the firearms into hands of people who would pull the trigger. How important is apprehending Kamar Cunningham? Extremely important for the safety of the citizens of Toronto.
At the end of the project, they stopped 78 guns from making it to the streets.
We take Project Patton, from what we saw, stopped that flow of guns. There's a lot for an illegal firearm to get from a gun show in Orlando into the hands of an individual in Toronto who's going to do a homicide. There's a lot of people in control, and there's a lot of people responsible for bringing those guns here to Canada, and they're responsible for those shootings that occur on the street. It took a wiretap of this magnitude and significance to take these individuals out.
Immediately after Project Patton, we saw a noted decrease in the level of violence, especially the level of gun violence in this area. At that time, they were one of the greatest risks to public safety in our city, and we did our best to dismantle them.
Despite the success of takedowns like Project Patton and the thousands of illegal weapons seized each year, crime guns continue to flow into Canada. Police say every gun on the street matters. It only takes one round to devastate a community. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.